Let's welcome Scott McDonald, CEO and President of the Advertising Research Foundation, who will come to the stage and introduce his panelists.
All right. Thank you.
You want us up?
You guys are important.
All right, everybody, in your seats, fasten your seat belts. Going to get to warp speed velocity here. So we have a panel of the leading associations. First and foremost, of course, is our Advertiser Association, Bob Liodice from the ANA, Marla Kaplowitz from the 4As, and George Ivie from the MRC, Media Ratings Council. So, welcome all. Now, the focus here is really on the industry wish list of where we stand, where we want to get as we move forward in cross-channel, cross-platform measurement. And let me look at my crib notes here. So, cross-platform measurement, both of ads and of content, continues to be a work in progress. Broadly speaking, there are 3 measurement goals that have been addressed. Eliminating waste, which would include getting rid of all the bad guys, the bots, the fraud, the garbage. Ensuring brand safety, and measuring what matters the most to marketers. And through all the complexity and all of the detail, the welter of detail, it still kind of boils down to those 3 things. So for the panel, from your perspective, how far have we gotten with that? You know, it's a year later. Where do we stand as of early 2018?
Want me to start?
Yep.
Okay. Well, eliminating waste, I think that we have made a lot of progress, particularly in the fraud area. The work of the Trustworthy Accountability Group, the work of a lot of brand and agency teams. We're starting to learn how to be able to control fraud, rein in the bots, make some real headway, and I think we're starting to see some data that's proving pretty effectiveness there. Brand safety, I'm actually going to I think George should be talking about that because he's kind of at the heart of a lot of that. But what's on the minds of marketers? How do we make better decisions? I think, it's funny, I've really been enjoying this program. But I find myself almost in a deja vu situation because as this industry continues to get increasingly complex, we're still back to asking the same types of questions is when I am managing a brand, when I'm managing a business and I'm controlling millions of dollars of marketing and media spend, do I have the information necessary to be able to make the right decisions to be able to grow my business? And on that front, we're striking out. Why? Because if you look at the Fortune 500 listing from 2017, 43% of those companies that are listed actually have declining revenues, and 52% have declining after-tax profits. So regardless of the complexity and the sophistication that we have, we're still not succeeding as well as we need to.
I'll let you go to brand safety.
Sure. First of all, I just want to say it's an honor to be on stage with you guys. You guys are all great.
We're honored to be with you.
I know.
So there's a ton of work going on, I guess, in the areas of eliminating advertising waste. TAG has been doing heavy lifting, but one thing I don't want you guys to forget is that we basically wrote those standards. And the important thing to remember about fraud is an extremely difficult moving target. So we've been doing things like trying to shore up guidance on in-app fraud, where our guidance is actually extremely weak. We haven't done a good enough job setting the standards in that area to make anti-fraud activity in in-app environments good enough. And as everybody knows, that's a huge environment today. So it's very critical. So we published new guidance. We're trying to accredit new providers on that basis. So the anti-fraud work, we've been making progress, but it's actually like a never-ending circle of work without radical changes in the structure of the advertising business. So that one's never going to go away. Brand safety, the MRC is working on some rather intense guidance in that area that we're going to be exposing to a working group but it really focuses on applying brand safety in newer environments, newer social-based environments, like applying advertising video on top of UGC content at scale. Very, very difficult problem. A lot of human intervention, AI needed, stuff like that. So there are standards in that area. And in other social environments that are news feed based, you have some similar issues, but also nuanced challenges like adjacency, where I'm running through my news feed and I've got a Tide ad, and sure, that's great, but if the next ad is objectionable content, an ISIS video or something, well, if it's the next ad, we're pretty sure that's a bad thing. But if it's 3 ads away, is that a bad thing? So you have to understand in newsfeed environments the idea of brand safety a little differently, and you're also trying to protect profiles and disqualify fictitious profiles. So there's work going on in that area. There's a lot of work, and we throw that under a different category. So eliminating advertising waste or things like viewability and fraud. Advertising in safe environments is really its own category. And then measuring what matters to marketers. We have a whole set of priorities on digital audience ratings, cross-media audience ratings that we're doing, things like deduplication, all kinds of stuff that are critical technical areas are in the standardization and many times in the audit process. So there's just so much activity going on, it's hard to describe.
And if you think of a year ago, brand safety had a very different set of issues than it does today. You think about what happened in the spring with Google, with the election, and there needs to be a lot more scrutiny on this. And there are companies that are created now, like an Open Slate, that are making sure that content is safe. And yes, we know that platforms are hiring thousands of people to try and address manual intervention, but to your point, we really need to address this more from an AI standpoint. And there need to be more solutions and not just having conversations. Actually, from a 4A's perspective, we are creating a forum on advertising assurance that we're doing on March 19th to bring together marketers and agencies and platforms and publishers to think about not just what we've been doing, but what can we be doing more moving forward, because this is really a critical issue and it's not going away. And the reality is that there are bad actors out there and they're going to constantly be figuring out how to do these things, and they're always one step ahead, and we need to figure out how we ensure that brands are in the right kind of environment and the right kind of content. I think what George said is really important. This is not just paid advertising, social media, news feeds, what's going on there. It's really critical to address the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, could I just say one other thing, Scott? It's important to audit this stuff. Like, everybody can make standards until they're purple, but enforcement, I think, is critical. So you have large digital enterprises, making assertions that they're going to do certain things to shore up these environments. They're going to hire all these people. They're setting rules. We need to go in and verify that that's actually executed. That is critical. And through the leadership of the 3MS partners, we've been working to break into the large digital enterprises and do those audits. And I think now a lot of them have turned the corner. They're becoming a lot more cooperative with us in data sharing and in auditing, and also enabling third-party measurement of their transactions, not just self-measurement. And that's critical to do things like deduplication, et cetera.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great work that's going on there, because when you ask the question about what matters most to marketers is the ability, if we're really going to do cross-platform and really get to attribution models, then we have to really break through the walled gardens and really understand what that data is about, and to be able to socialize that in a way that we can contrast and compare. And I think that the work that George and company are doing is really the right area of focus that's going to hopefully longer term give us the data sets necessary to aid that decision making and really learn a lot more about what's happening out there.
So in the earlier panel this afternoon, a reference was made to muscle memory, sort of institutional inertia, and one might characterize that as one impediment to progress in the area of building more effective measurement tools. And then we've also talked about the technical issues and the fact that there are bad actors who, as soon as you publish a standard, they're going to be the first people trying to figure out how to game it and work around it. And so, you know, you're kind of in whack-a-mole. I mean, given all of that, I mean, how can we move this all faster? How can we accelerate our ability to overcome those barriers? Or are there other barriers that we ought to be thinking about as well that are stopping our progress?
Well, I guess one thing I would say, Scott, and I've watched the whole program today with great interest. This is always a terrific meeting to learn, and insightful meeting. There is a lot of muscle memory, but in a way that's good. And one thing that MRC does is we audit large research companies, some of which do a great job maintaining things like sampling, and everybody's down on panels and stuff. But the truth is, there's still some decent, very expensive panel work that's done. We visit households all over the United States, and what you can't forget is that the US just doesn't go, whoosh, we're all digital. Like, you still got 50% of the people out there, I'm making this up, but that have their VCR blinking at them, right? And they put in a tape. So you can't forget about those people. And so muscle memory in a way is kind of good, because the US is really not just one big thing. It's a lot of different strata that behave differently. And I think the more we recognize that and realize that we can't program one solution because of that, that's a good thing. And so I think looking at this stuff, trying to overcome muscle memory is great. We have to do it. We have to move the ball forward. You know, I saw at the introduction that these standards processes are slow, but they're very, very meaningful. They're difficult to do, difficult to get consensus on. But I think our tradition is when we do it right. We get a lot of input. And I think it's going to take a lot of that to set the goals for the vendors instead of let the vendors set goals for us. I think that'll help address many of the problems that you're thinking of, if we can all just get together and collaborate and put that forward.
Well, to build on that, I think part of that collaboration needs to be guided by the fact that we really don't have a good governance system in the measurement community. I mean, think about all the measurement organizations. I mean, you're one, CIMM's another, MRC's a third. We have to, I mean, I was very impressed with Jane's opening presentation, because she had that nice list of all of the integrated projects that are taking place across the ecosystem. We need really more of that in order to be able to bring together our collective needs, wants, wishes, and desires, so that we're all organizing in a way that reflects our common agenda. I'm not sure we're really in a good place right now to be able to break through that and be able to talk with a more singular voice.
I certainly agree. And I think the alternative is likely to be just, you know, whoever is the biggest company sets a standard by dint of being the biggest company, and everybody kind of has to live with that. And you know, and I'll say, you know, those very large companies are often very cooperative in engaging with the rest of the industry as well in that. The example comes, I think, of the AdX anti-spoofing initiative at the Ivie Tech Lab, which Google got behind, and it made a sea change effectively in the degree to which publishers signed up for it. Sort of overcame some inertia and muscle memory. So I think it's everybody engaging with that. But beyond that, what can we do, you know, as industry associations to help to make that a reality and not have it be just, you know, the law of the jungle? Because that's I mean, there are people, you know, in this room who would argue that that's what's likely to happen. You know, that the biggest companies will set the standards as de facto, and everybody else will just have to deal with it.
Well, part of the accountability is with us, client-side marketers.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had really an opportunity, not that we haven't had an opportunity, but I don't think we've defined well what are our collective needs. And we've not necessarily organized what their wants and wishes are, what their needs are to be able to make the better decisions. We can essentially imply or impute what they may be, but I think we have to do a far better job at organizing our thinking around that, and then organizing the ecosystem to help be able to funnel how we make better decisions.
I think the challenge is marketers ultimately want just information that's going to help them make better decisions, but each marketer runs their business a little bit differently, has different objectives, has different needs at the end of the day, but we need to just find those commonalities. And as Rashad said, marketers have the money, and they need to dictate what they want and use that money for their voice.
Does-
You know, maybe 8, 9 years ago, we started down the path of this project called 3MS. And it had 5 clear principles, which I still to this day believe were very, very good and sound. And we've been going down a path of implementing. But I think it is time to sit back and reassess this and create kind of a new direction beyond 3MS as an industry, maybe with the same type of cooperation that 3MS had. Well, not maybe, certainly. I think that's required or it won't move. And get behind a new set of priorities, building on where 3MS is at this point, completing that mission, but going beyond into things like data and attribution, which is part of our cross-media standard, but it certainly isn't going to wrestle the industry to the ground like we need to straighten that out. But I do think we need to reprioritize around things like analytics, you know, and how they fit in, and talent and stuff like that.
So maybe in a related vein, a question really about building momentum within the industry and beyond the measurement people that might be at a meeting like this or an ARF meeting. When you talk about measurement, it can be pretty technical and pretty wonky. And going back to, you know, the situation in the room with the CEO or the CFO, where, you know, they're looking for metrics that are going to ignite growth. They're looking for things that will help them solve problems in usually in a relatively short time horizon. What do you see as being the way to make measurement and the investments that would be necessary to actually accelerate and move measurement forward? And it doesn't come free. You got to do a lot of spade work. What do you see as being the best way that the measurement people in all of the companies involved in this, both the marketer side, the media side, the research company side, the agencies, how do we make measurement tangible as a benefit to the bottom line of companies?
You've got to simplify the language is the first thing. You have to speak in terms that they will understand and not make it too techy or too wonky. Convert that to business realities, business terms, because the CEO and the CFO, they care about the bottom line. And to your point, it is probably more of a short-term focus. So what is going to deliver sales? What is going to drive, what's really going to drive those objectives in the near term to deliver on those needs? And so this is where attribution, though, is helpful. The problem is it takes a while. It's generally looking back. How do we make sure that it's looking ahead and giving the right guidance moving forward? We all want to believe that marketing is an investment, but we also know that it's looked at as a cost. And so you have to understand that and need to make sure that you're identifying what are those metrics. And even probably saying metrics and KPIs, it's not necessarily what they want to hear. What is the end result and the business deliverable to the bottom line?
You know, one of the things that we try to do at the ANA, and I'm sure Marla does at the 4As, and it's actually your lifeblood, I think, Scott, is we learn from case histories. We learn from each other by sharing the war stories about how success is generated and where the failures occurred. And those are life's lessons in helping to guide more common type of behavior that, I don't want to say set standards, but at least set parameters for how success can be achieved. I don't think that we in the measurement community really get enough of what those success stories are. And we heard a little bit in the previous thing with the Channel 4 at the UK. I thought that was a very compelling story about how various brands, in fact, can work within a very different type of ecosystem to bring success to particular brands. But I don't know whether we socialize those stories well enough here in the US very, very well, so that we can understand where there may be common types of behavior, common measurements, common approaches that the ecosystem may be using in order to be able to guide us to say, you know what, if you kind of go in this particular direction and use these types of KPIs with this types of investment types of decisions, more times than not, you're going to be successful. But where do those things come out? Rather, I think we get very, very granular. You talked about getting into the weeds, getting into the technicalities. Do we get high enough to be able to understand those war stories that can guide more of the granular types of measurements and approaches that we need to take? So that may be a thought process, be able to document those things and to be able to spread the good word about what works and what doesn't.
Sounds like we need TED Talks.
I think we do.
Yeah. Of measurement success stories. George, you have a thought on it?
Look, I guess, you know, I live in a very down-to-earth place. Like, we have to execute and accredit things and audit things. So I'll just give you a very simple list. I mean, we've been working on eliminating advertising waste through viewability and fraud and digital reduction, and basically that work is ongoing. It may never end. We've been trying to push the digital marketplace towards trading on targeted audience categories like we do in other media, setting the standards to do that in digital, trying to break products like, let's say, Nielsen DAR or ComScore VCE into these large environments like the walled gardens to create comparable measurement, third-party measurement in those environments of audiences. Then putting them in a cross-platform environment. At that point, you're starting to build a foundation for even being able to assess the effectiveness of the media vehicles across each other. Until you did that, you could claim you've got ideas of how this stuff works, but you don't really. You needed that foundation. Then the last phase of 3MS is to focus on metrics related to add value. That's where the payoff is. We're going to be standardizing those metrics. Sales lift. Everybody's talking about sales lift in the room today. Not one of those providers is audited. Not one of those providers is transparent through an audit. That should happen. If you work with those providers, you should be going to talk to them about coming to the table to have their methodology audited. Bring transparency to that. Then we'll have some accountability around determining the reality of investments. That's what I say. Very simple world I live in.
The sunshine rule. Yeah. So going back to the subject of measuring what matters to marketers the most, most of the debates and most of the work that we've done has really been primarily still about exposures and trying to get exposures right, you know, and deduplicate exposures and get, you know, all touch points measured for, you know, opportunities to see. And that's great, but of course, it may only be a part of what ultimately matters for advertising effectiveness. And there's kind of a gap between, you know, the exposure and then, you know, the ROI sales lift, and it's not always very well understood. And some people would argue, you know, we should be trading on attention, however we measure that. We should be measuring on, you know, engagement was, you know, was brought up, I think, more ironically earlier on. But do you think I mean, are we obliged to solve the exposure issue before we do any of the rest? Can we do work on the things in between? How do you see that measurement of what matters from your perspective?
I think you have to start with what does matter to figure out what you're going to measure. And we heard a lot of passion earlier for attention, and even Joe Marchese saying, how do you have attribution without attention? And I think because of the world we live in today, there is scarcity in attention, and people want to understand that it's beyond opportunity to see because people can look away, people can tune out, people have a way to avoid. And so how do you know you're actually connecting there and that it has an impact? And I do think that is critical.
You know, you used the key word, which was connecting, and I thought Rashad made a very good point this morning, this afternoon, when he was talking about how the Internet of Things is truly connecting everything. And when you think about the totality of our marketing spend, I don't know whether we're really taking the holistic perspective. In fact, I know we're not. What do I mean? We spend nearly about $1 trillion in marketing in the US each year. The one that gets the most attention is the $200 billion in advertising. So advertising is a relatively small component in the total marketing spend. are we as a measurement industry really connecting the dots in the same way that the Internet of Things is connecting users with various products and services purchases, where everything is all automatically connected? I don't think we've taken that holistic perspective. And so what matters, I think, to marketers, and maybe the marketers themselves don't totally understand this either, is the ability to look at the total spend. I mean, what am I talking about? I'm talking about things such as experiential marketing or public relations or things of that nature, sponsorships. There's a whole array of investments that make up the balance of that nearly $800 billion of spend that we're not connecting those dots to the drivers of what we think are moving mountains in advertising through television and digital, et cetera. So there is a broad spectrum that I think we need to bring back into the universe of measurement and the holistic perspective of what really matters in driving that success and driving that business growth of where marketers are voting for. And getting that help from our agency partners and our measurement components I think are going to be very critical in helping to define what measurements we need and what decisions we make.
Those certainly are some of the questions I get at the ARF.
I can imagine.
How do you put a value on a sponsorship?
Right.
How do you put a value on influencer marketing? I mean, these are things that are not specifically advertising, but they're a key part of the mix right now.
I think it really drives the point home that we're not going to have a one-size-fits-all solution in measurement. It's going to be, with all the components that Bob just described, it's mind-boggling to put all that stuff together. But we're going to have a bunch of different solutions. Doesn't mean we don't need standards for those. Doesn't mean we don't need transparency for those. Doesn't mean we don't have to collaborate for those. But I think a lot of what's been described in this meeting today about the complexity and the fact that, you know, what is the meaning of the term currency anymore? I think those are all real and facing us. And we have to look at that and react and work our best in that complex environment.
But that elevates the need for the George Ivies and the Scotts and the Janes in order to take that higher profile for what it is that we need to do. We need that leadership necessary to push us to that next level, because it is increasingly complex. I mean, it used to be television, print, radio, and there are dozens and dozens of things that marketers are spending money on.
Exactly.
And we got to make sure they're evaluated fairly.
Right.
Right. So I was actually encouraged by Jane's checklist at the beginning, since I think when you look at it, it's a daunting list, but there is actual movement, there's progress.
Right.
And even though other things come up, and it can sometimes feel like whack-a-mole and this sort of, you know, frustrating experience, I think there is, at least from my perspective, reason to be optimistic that we can move it and accelerate it further. And I think with that, the clock is out.
We're done. Keep kicking us, Scott.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.